here are some secrets for building super fast box stock cars. So a lot of people have been asking me, how do your cars go so fast? Why are they so much faster than mine? What kinds of methods do you use? What kinds of things do you do to make your car faster? Do you replace any of the box stock parts with any special performance parts maybe to maybe make your car faster? No, you don't need to do that. Remember that box stock, the category itself, is all about using the parts within the kit. Or if you need to substitute something, it's got to be the exact equivalent of what's inside the kit. So some people will replace their wheels, for example, with a different color wheel. So long as the material of the wheel is the same, and so long as the tire material is the same, that is supposed to be a valid substitute. Now, suppose you have things like wheel shafts, the axles that run along and basically hold these two wheels in place. Can you replace those things? Yes, you can, because that is replacing a one-for-one item with the same exact item. You're not allowed to replace the normal steel shafts with reinforced shafts or hollow shafts, but you are allowed to replace with the exact same item. Here are some tips to follow to try to make your car faster. So not all of these techniques may work for you for whatever reason, but I would say that if you do apply all of these techniques to your cars, you're going to build a much faster car. It's going to just be generally faster. Now, here's the problem. Just because you have the fastest car does not mean you're going to win, right? Because sometimes a super fast car on a certain track will just course out, or it will cause some other crazy mishap, like it might flip upside down, corkscrew, when it's going over a jump or around a curve. So just because you have the fastest car does not mean that you'll always win. What you need to do is consider the track itself, the car you're racing, what style chassis you've got, things like that. And sometimes, believe it or not, sometimes you could have two more or less identical cars that you've built. Let's say two of these Brocken Gigantes, and they will act completely differently. You may have built them the same exact way, using the same exacting standards, but they just behave differently because there's something different about each of the cars. And that's okay, because what you want to do is you want to build as many box stock cars as you can, and then basically test these box stock cars on the track that you're about to race. So don't have just a few cars ready for racing. Have more than a few cars and try them all out on the track that you're about to race on. So yeah, more is better in this particular case, because if you have a track that has all these different obstacles, you definitely want to be ready for it, no matter what. So here's something to consider. Wheel shafts. You want to get the straightest wheel shafts you can get. Now, the wheel shafts that come in a kit, there's two steel shafts. And it may be possible that both are completely straight, maybe one is straight and the other is not straight, or both of them are not straight. So those are the three possibilities. That's it. There's no other possibilities. So if you get to two completely straight shafts, awesome, hallelujah, good luck to you. That's great. But if you get one that's crooked and one that's straight, then you have to replace the crooked shaft with an equivalent straight shaft. And if you have two crooked shafts, you have to replace both of them. So what do you use to test your shafts with? There's two methods, or two major methods. The first method is to use this thing called a wheel shaft checker. So this can be purchased online. You can purchase it from various outlets. You can go to AliExpress and buy this for relatively cheap if you'd like, or you can get the more expensive Inamoto ones. And yeah, they're all really good for detecting straight shafts versus crooked shafts. So all you do is you run the shaft through the checker. So I uncapped the top right here, and here's some example wheel shafts. And here we go. First we do a drop test vertically, and if it goes through, great. It doesn't, it just gets stuck right there. So that's not a good shaft, that's basically crooked. How about this one? Nope, it went out a little bit further than the previous one, but it's also not straight. So what you can do with these crooked shafts is you could either discard them or use them for other purposes, or you can try to straighten them. So there's a method for straightening these shafts, and it's not complicated, it's just very time consuming. So the second method, besides this wheel shaft checker, the second method for determining if your shaft is straight is to basically lay these shafts on top of your phone, either iPhone or Android device, and you want to basically lay it on top of the screen and then look at it from the side. So here's your phone, and you lay it on the side like this, you turn on the phone so that you can see the light underneath this shaft. Now if you see the light underneath the shaft, if you see that the shaft looks crooked, then it's a crooked shaft and you need to basically get a straight shaft. If it's straight, if you see like basically the same amount of light underneath the shaft from top to bottom, then it's a straight shaft. Now, how to repair these crooked shafts? So what you need to do is you need to basically roll this so that you get the shaft to be in kind of like a upward concave kind of way. And then you take this and then you start bending it. You physically bend the shaft. Very little, a little bit at a time. Less is more. So you basically take this to where you think the bend is, to the edge of the phone, and you gently lean into it so that you unbend the bend. So that's very time consuming. You might cause a bend in a different direction. So you have to basically be very, very diligent, very careful with how much you bend and where you bend. So yeah, it can take a long time to straighten a shaft. But you know what? You can always use or repurpose these shafts for other purposes. For example, on one of my cars, I think I may have it here. Yes. I have here my Pro car. And my Pro car has a non-straight shaft that was repurposed to be, yes, a weight on the tail damper. Pretty cool, yeah. And you can see on one of my other cars, same thing, a non-straight shaft being repurposed as a tail damper weight. Pretty cool. So yeah, just because you have a part that's defective doesn't mean that you should just throw it out. But if you want to, you can throw them out, of course. That's your choice. So yeah, so straight shaft, a very important thing. Very, very important. Then the next thing to consider is your wheels. Now, just because you've unwrapped a new kit and you decided to put together the wheels and you're putting the wheels onto the shaft using something like this, a wheel press, right? So this provides the most accurate way of placing the wheels on the shafts. However, if the wheels themselves are not straight, so if the shaft holes on the inside of the wheels are not straight, you're not going to get a straight path from one wheel to the other wheel. It's just not. And there's no way to determine whether something is straight or crooked unless you basically put them onto the wheel shaft, and then you can see for yourself. So when you put them on here, you could have them as straight as you like. They can look as straight as possible through here, but when you turn this on and then you turn it off and you see this slowing down, if you see a wobble, then you know that the wheels aren't straight. If you still see like a consistent roll without a wobble, then you're pretty straight. Now, the only other way, not the only other way, but one of the other ways to determine straightness is to use a laser detection device to determine if something is straight or not. Using light, basically, to accurately figure out, like, if there's, like, a certain amount of tolerance between the edge of this compared to the edge of this, for example. So, yeah, you could use scientific methods to determine if the wheels are straight or not. So you want to do that on both sets of wheels, not just one set of wheels. However, I would say that if given a choice, if you have a straight shaft and a non-straight shaft and there's no other way around it, like let's say you had to build a car very quickly and you've just so happens you only have a straight shaft and you only have a crooked shaft and you don't have any other shafts available to replace the crooked shafts with a straight shaft, then I would say that you place your straight shaft on the car depending on if your car is a front motor or a rear motor. So if your car is a rear motor, the power goes to the rear wheels first. That's where your straight shaft should be. If it's a front motor, like an FMA chassis, then you place the straight shaft on the front part of the car. So that's only in that case where there's one straight shaft and one crooked shaft and there's no other possible replacement shafts that you have available. Another thing to consider is the rollers. Okay, so how you insert the rollers into your car chassis. Very, very important. So most people use the dry method. I call it the dry and the wet method. The dry method is such. You cut all the parts off the tree and then suddenly you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to take the screw and place it into the roller, and I've got my washer and I place it on there, and then I put it in to the hole, and then I twist and turn and I call it a day. Once I feel that resistance and I can't turn anymore, the roller's in place, and that's called the dry method. Now, The problem with the dry method is you could potentially strip and crack the hole that's on the chassis. That's a bad thing. How do we prevent that? Or how do we lessen that possibility of a cracked chassis? There's a quick and easy method for that. What you do is, prior to inserting the screw into the hole, you apply a small drop of oil into the hole, and then you insert the screw in. Now, another thing to consider is the concavity or the convexity of the washer. Yes, folks, if you take a look at a washer and you flip it upside down, there's a concave side and there's a convex side. Convex is like a bump. Concave is like a U shape. So what I like to do is to make sure that the convex side is on top. And that helps the roller ride on the convex side, the washer, much better. So your mileage may vary, but that's my little trick and tidbit right there. So you do that on both sides, and you want to make sure that your rollers spin relatively nicely. And how do you assure that? You want to apply a little drop of oil right around the edge of the screw, the tiniest drop of oil, and you spin it. And if you see it spin freely, you know you're good. If it still sticks, if it just turns like a little bit and stops, then you know you've either applied too much oil, or maybe there's dust in there, or maybe you haven't applied enough oil. So you need to apply enough oil so that it spins freely. It doesn't have to spin infinitely like metal rollers do, but it still has to spin relatively well, so that when the rollers do hit the sidewall of the track, there's going to be some resistance, and it will then roll very freely along the sidewalls. That's what you want, for sure. So, which is more important? If you had good front rollers or good back rollers, which is more important? Good front rollers. So make sure that when you're inspecting your car before you race, that the front rollers are not crooked in some way. So sometimes during like very harsh tracks, these, like in an FMA chassis, for example, these front rollers might get rocked a little bit, and so things will be a little bit crooked. They won't be straight anymore. You want to make sure that the roller is parallel to the ground and the screw is perpendicular to the ground. So it's very easy to see that if you're just looking at it from the front view and you're just inspecting very closely here. So I see right here, through a little bit of battle damage, that these rollers kind of caved in a slight bit. So caving in a slight bit is okay. Caving in a little too much is not okay, because then there's not going to be good contact with the roller to the edge of the track. And then you can cause all sorts of issues like course outs. Things can corkscrew, things like that. Okay, so another thing to consider is the quality of your brake. If you have a brake on your chassis, you want to make sure that the screws that attach to the brake are not movable. So by that I mean, make sure that you tighten the screws all the way. And if you feel that the screws are continuing to turn, no matter how many times you try to tighten the screws, that means the hole is stripped, and you want to repair that. So you can use a little drop of super glue in the hole first, and then you attach the screw on top. And attach it slowly, and you'll see when you meet that point of resistance, you stop right there, and then you wait for it to dry, and then you test that resistance again. And you should be able to unscrew the screw and insert it back in, and you should find that point of resistance as if it were a normal hole, not stripped. So, another point to consider is the quality of your motor, of course, right? So the faster motors yield faster cars generally. So what you want to do is, my suggestion, take a set, let's say you bought 10 cars. Take all 10 of these motors out and break them in using my break-in process, or any break-in process that you favor. Do them all at the same time so you have a consistent level of quality. So if you just do one or two at a time, and that's all you can do, then great. But if you can do many more at a time, you then know that this batch of motors is going to be pretty consistent across the board, because you're going to be doing the same method as you're breaking the motors in on all 10 of the motors. So you'll also be able to see across all 10 which are your fast motors, which are your slow motors, and you want to mark them accordingly. So what I like to do is I like to mark in red or silver on the motor itself what the RPM speed is. So this one's 33,000 RPM, this atomic tune motor. So yeah, pretty cool. And on my box stock motors, I do the same. So box stock motors in general, the way I measure them with the G-force running at 3 volts, and then I use Geary to measure the speed, the RPMs. So a lot of people say, oh, your numbers are off, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, yeah, my numbers are always 20% greater than others because that's just what the output is out of the G-force. And if you do a little math, you'll arrive at what the actual numbers should be. But aside from that, if all of your motors have been tested the same way using the same method, then you have consistently measured your RPMs across your full range of motors. And the true test is, why the heck is my car much faster than other people's cars, right? So that's how I know that I'm testing my RPMs properly. So I would say that box stock, if you can get 25,000 RPM, or my version of measurement, if I can get 25,000 RPM on a motor, I'm doing pretty well. And that usually translates to about 25 kilometers per hour. So that's pretty cool. So if you can get more than that, then you can get more kilometers per hour. So roughly, when I get a 29,000 RPM box stock motor, which is a rarity, but it happens, then roughly I can get about 28, 29 kilometers per hour on that car. Pretty cool. So yeah, I have seen people getting more than 28, 29 kilometers per hour. Usually they have larger wheels, and that's how they get away with that. So I've seen 31 kilometers per hour, for example, on those large wheels, and they have a 3.5 to 1 gear ratio. But typically, box stock cars, Tamiya takes a look at the wheels and assigns a gear that's appropriate to the wheels. So you can't get a car that's way too fast or way too slow. Well, you can get a car that's way too slow, the animal racers, but I digress. Typically, if you've got these large round wheels like you see here, typically, if this were not an animal racer, you would get a 4.2 to 1 gear ratio for this one, for these kinds of wheels. Whereas wheels that are more of the conventional type, like these 26 millimeter wheels, like on the Elephant Racer, typically you would get a 3.5 to 1 gear ratio if this are not an animal racer. And then for these little guys, these little 24 millimeter wheels, they kind of handicap them by giving them 3.5 to 1 gear ratios. That's the fastest you can get as a gear ratio, so they just give it to you. And sometimes they're stupid and they give you 4 to 1 gear ratio for whatever reason. Like, that's kind of weird. But anyway, yeah. So, straight shafts, straight wheels, straight rollers, a fast motor. What else? Oh, a well-attached brake. What else? So, stickers. A word about stickers. And many of you already know about my bias against stickers. Stickers add weight to a car. So I have a bias against adding too many stickers. However, there are cars, like the Mach-Frin, where adding additional weight is not so bad. When you have a car that weighs a lot less than other cars because it's got like a very tiny cowl, you want to try to distribute the weight properly on your car. So basically, when you have like a polycarbonate shell, there's like almost no weight added to the car, and you're basically riding just a chassis. You're racing a chassis on the track. So what you want to do, if you can, is to take all your stickers and apply them towards the front of the car so you add more nose weight to the car. And so when the car jumps over, like it goes over a slope, when it goes on its down trajectory, the additional weight will keep the car nose down. You don't ever want the car to come off of a slope and then continue going like this. That's just terrible. You want it to really go like this, like in a trajectory. And the best way to do that is to weigh the front. Now, FMA chassis, there's an automatic advantage because the motor is in the front of the car. There's an automatic weight advantage. The distribution is just perfect when you're trying to leap over hills and stuff. But if you don't have that advantage, you have to try to figure out ways of adding more weight towards the front. And one of the ways that you can do is to basically apply all of your stickers towards the nose. And that might give you 1, maybe 2 grams more of weight in the front. Depending on the rules and what they say, you can try to apply everything that's part of the sticker sheet towards the front of this. You can take your wax backing paper from the sticker sheet, apply that on the underside of the cowl and just tape it all down. I mean, it's still part of the sticker sheet, right? So it depends on the rules. It depends on what you can permissibly do. It depends on the race organizer, the racing event organizer, and what he or she will allow. So yes, pretty cool. So I would say that things like this is a very decorative car. It's not meant to win any races. It's meant to look fun. But adding these stickers on the wheels itself actually interferes with the aerodynamics of the car. And you may beg to differ about that, but there is something to be said about having less drag-resistant materials on a car so that it can go faster. Another thing is, you do not need to attach all the parts of the cowl to have this be considered a valid cowl. So this mock frame, you could take it apart into 3 different pieces, and you could attach just the main piece on there, and you'll have a weight reduction, a very nice weight reduction. However, the way this was designed, this car seems to be designed to work best when all 3 pieces are present. So it's kind of weird. And I've also played with the weight distribution by attaching additional stickers on here. And as you see here, my Korean mock frame has additional silver stickers on there. These are stickers that I fabricated using the leftover parts of the sticker sheet. So it's all that silver foil stuff that surrounds the actual stickers themselves. I just created designs using like stripe designs using the leftover materials. And so I added a little bit more weight, like about 1 gram right in the front there, so that it does fare better, even better off of slope jumps. Another tip is to ensure that, some people forget this, but that little screw right there that holds the gear, it's the gear cover basically. It holds the gear cover in place. Definitely attach the screw there on that gear cover. Some people forget about it and they leave it off, but if this thing somehow jostles loose and the gear somehow jostles loose, you're going to get all sorts of issues with your car. So you want to keep this gear cover securely attached to your vehicle. You want to make sure that it's securely attached so that it runs as fast as possible with your battery power. Now, battery power. So a lot of you know that some racing event organizers allow for certain kinds of batteries in your car for certain events. Really, you should just be using alkaline batteries with your car. So alkaline does not mean lithium. Alkaline does not mean nickel metal hydride rechargeables. Alkaline is alkaline. Alkaline batteries are not rechargeable. You should not be trying to recharge alkaline batteries. It's just alkaline batteries fresh out of the pack. That's what alkaline batteries are. And so you should be racing your box stock cars with alkaline batteries only. Now, that having been said, there are different kinds of alkaline batteries. They have all different types and they are not equivalent. So there are alkaline batteries that are a little longer lasting. There are also alkaline batteries that are lighter than other alkaline batteries. So depending on the car that you're racing, that's what will determine which alkaline batteries you should use. So I have discovered through my own trials and error, I love the Rayovac high energy alkaline batteries. They are the blue and silver alkaline batteries. And yeah, they're pretty cool. Here they are. And there's also another one. They also make a fusion cell battery. It's a fusion alkaline battery. And here it is right here. It's red and silver. That's also a good one, but it's like twice the price. And it's really not worth it, but you do get 2 grams less of weight. So that might be worth it for some of you who are like very fine-tuning your car and you need that 2 grams less of weight so you can go a little faster. So yeah, weight of the batteries, another very important topic. So another thing to consider, do you need the battery cover? So I remember winning a race once where for some gosh knows what reason, when I placed this battery cover on my car, it was causing the car not to start. So there's some weird loose connection going on there. So I removed the battery cover and just simply placed my cowl back on there, and I hoped for the best. And the cowl kept the batteries in place, and I was able to win. And I won by like a nose, and I believe I won because the weight of the car was actually reduced a little bit by not having this battery cover in place. So it's little things like this, you know, like I think that was the reason why I won, because I won by a nose. If I had the battery cover on there, it would have weighed a little bit more, who knows? I maybe would have been a little bit slower. So little things like that do add up. So you have to remember that these are 132 scale models. So an ounce here is like 32 ounces in real life. So that's 2 pounds more in real life, an ounce here. So you have to think about it like that. Like any little change you make on a big car, it would be like a big change, right? So a little change that you make here is actually considered a big change for this little car. So that's how you have to look at it. And so when you look at things like straightness of the shafts, you also have to consider straightness of the chassis. So a racing friend of mine, Latif, he basically told me about the importance of a straight chassis. And by straight chassis, we mean something that lays flat. Flat so that when you place it on a table without the wheels, it lays completely flat. And a lot of chassis are not completely flat, unfortunately. So you might have to purchase multiple kits to get a completely flat chassis. That's just the way it is. That's just the way things like batches of plastic are molded. Sometimes you get something that's good, sometimes not. It's a random occurrence, everybody. And so sometimes your kit might be sitting in a warehouse somewhere in 95-degree temperature and things start warping. You know what happens when plastic warps? It's just not straight anymore. And there's nothing you can do about it. So yeah, that's just one of the unfortunate facts of plastic. However, if you get your kits around certain times where the temperature is like totally awesome and no warpage happens, then you've got potentially straight chassis, and that's pretty cool. Another thing is temperature also affects other parts in your kit. It can also affect your tires, how hard or soft they end up becoming. Somebody actually reviewed the low-frix tires, the new versions versus the ones from several years ago, and they were saying something about how the new ones are softer than the old ones, blah, 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 but you know, I think it's just the temperature affected the tire material itself. So when you get these new, they tend to be softer, and over time, when they're stored in a warehouse or basically sitting on a shelf not doing anything, these materials start getting more hard, more brittle over time. So I think that's what's going on there. It's not that the new material is any better or worse than the old or different than the old. It's just age is causing these things to deteriorate in some way or change in some way, not necessarily deteriorate. Another tip is the transmission. So the transmission here is a single shaft propeller shaft. And yes, took it right out of the package and it looks like this. And you might say to yourself, I'm just going to put this right in there and I'm going to just assemble all of the kit just like that. No, you want to examine how this sits and lays inside your chassis. Because once you place this in your chassis, try moving it up and down. And if you see a little bit too much shake, if it moves a little too much, you have to reduce that potential shake. So you want to take something like a mallet or something that's heavy and just lightly tap this so that these pinions on the ends of the shaft get a little bit tighter onto the shaft itself. So that when you then reinsert this propeller shaft into the chassis and you do the wiggle test, you want to minimize the wiggle as much as possible. Don't minimize it so much that you can't move this anymore. Because remember, this thing still has to rotate inside the chassis, right? It still has to rotate like this inside the chassis. So there still has to be potential room for movement inside the chassis. Now, one of the things that open class people like to do is they like to trim the propeller shaft. You're not allowed to do that for box stock. If you get caught doing that, then you will be disqualified. Don't do it. You can do it for open class though. You can basically angle cut each of these ends here on the top and also on the underside. So you'll get this kind of six-sided diagonal shape, like a hexagonal shape, if you look at it from the side like this. And that basically reduces resistance inside the chassis. But otherwise, you have to leave your shaft, your propeller shaft, looking like this. Now, once you get this inside the chassis, you want to make sure that this is well lubricated. And the best lubricant for that is this stuff in the blue and black tube. This is the mini four-wheel drive grease. You want to take a small drop of this, place it on the pinion gear, and take a small paintbrush and swipe the grease in between the spokes. All of the spokes on the top side as well as the bottom side. You want to make sure everything's well lubricated. Not only that, make sure the top is lubricated too. The ends, the very ends of these should be lubricated too. And then you've got a good propeller shaft. And hopefully this will be straight. If it's not, then you might have to replace it with another one. You can find that in another kit, or you can purchase it from Tamiya. There's a part number for that too. You want to also make sure that your clips, the battery clips, never bend in such a way that they prevent contact to the battery. So what most people like to do, and this is actually permissible, is to place little sponge brake pieces underneath the battery clips, as you see there. So I've got the red sponge brake or the pink sponge brake underneath the battery clips, and that prevents these battery clips from bending inwards so much that they don't have contact with the battery terminals anymore. So you want to make sure that they're jammed behind the battery clips so that when you place them in, that the terminals don't push the clips in all the way so that there's no contact anymore. So there will always be contact, or almost always be contact, if you have your battery clips like this. Every now and again, you want to take apart your car and just make sure that everything looks clean on the insides. So it's a simple matter of just like taking apart everything piece by piece, and just doing a visual inspection is good. So you want to make sure that there's no excess dust inside the car. If there is dust, you want to clean it out. You might want to re-lubricate your propeller shaft and your gears in there. Yeah, there's all little things you can do to make your car fast again if it ends up getting slower and slower over time. The gear that's in here, inside the gear cover, that's something that you should seriously consider like reconditioning every now and again. So sometimes there can be a buildup of grease inside the gear cover. You want to swipe away all the excess so that there's room for the gear to do its job, which is to move freely. You want to also re-lubricate the shaft that's holding the gear in place. So make sure that there's enough oil on that shaft. So the oil that I recommend, get this oil pen. You know what I'm talking about. It's this oil pen right here, the Tamiya oil pen. Pretty cool. Lubricating rollers, lubricating the shafts between the chassis body and the wheels. You can use sewing machine oil for that. You can use my brand Ganapati oil for that. There's a lot of different oils you can use. Some people even use WD-40 to make sure that everything's degreased and smooth. You want to also make sure that everything sounds smooth. So when you're turning the car on, it should sound like a hum, a good hum. There should be no rattling, there should be no like wobble, shaking sounds inside the car. If you do experience any of those, then you need to take your car apart and try to figure out the source of that problem. So your car should sound smooth, the transmission should sound smooth. So yes, everybody, these are some awesome tips here on how to build a better box stock, how to build a super fast box stock. And if you follow all of these tips and techniques and tricks and advice, you should be on your way to building the fastest box stock cars in your racing event. Yes. So everybody, if you love this video, please slam the like button, subscribe to my channel. You'll see more videos just like this one. Until next time, everybody, see you. Bye.